desirable for people that are experiencing homelessness. Many of our shelters take two people. People come, they're homeless as a couple. So one shelter can house two people. You can see a double bed. We just started adding air conditioners to all of our Seattle homes because it's been hot up there. They're all with power, electric power, so they have heat, they have lights, now AC, but they don't have plumbing. And that's why we need the common buildings for the kitchens and all the other facilities that take water. That's a critical part of the village infrastructure. So, Veterans Day, I just wanted to point this out. This is the book I read this summer. Homelessness is a housing problem. And this was written by a professor and a data scientist. And what they did is they scrubbed the data around the country to try and define, what's the data say? Why is homelessness 5 times higher on the West Coast in Seattle, San Francisco, in LA, compared to the Midwest, Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis? The cities don't seem necessarily that different. What's driving homelessness to be 5 times worse on the coast? Well, the title kind of gives it away. It's a housing problem. And I could go on and on about this book and the myths about homelessness that the data just does not support. Homelessness is a housing problem. I recommend this book. And if we have time at the end, I can talk more about that. But one key point that they brought up, they went through and talked about the drivers of homelessness. Then they talked about what it's going to take to change things to house the homeless. And then they asked, can it be done? And the evidence that they showed that it can be done is this right here. Between 2009 and 2019, we reduced homelessness amongst American veterans across the country by 50%. So that's huge in this area. It's still not nearly enough, but it's huge. Now, how they did that? Political will, resource commitment, both parties working together on a common goal. So the proof is it can be done. We just need to do it. And what we've done with veterans is evidence of that. Wanted to bring that in. So last January, I volunteered in the Tucson point in time count. Every year in major communities around the country, HUD requires for housing funding that the community conduct a point in time count to count the number of people experiencing homelessness in that community. So in Tucson, it was a January morning from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And I was teamed up with these other individuals. By the way, this guy in the center is John McClane, not the guy from Die Hard. But this John runs the Veterans Rescue Mission for housing the homeless up in Tucson. Another tie into the veterans situation. But what our findings in the count found? Tucson has experienced homelessness increase by 60% since 2018. But check this out. Unsheltered homelessness is up around 250%. So people being really freaked out about what's going on with homelessness in Tucson is real. It's dramatically increasing. And by the way, in Phoenix, it's even worse. And I was told the state of Arizona is rated the worst in the country for increasing homelessness because of cost of housing. So what can we do to effectively solve this? And that's what I want to talk about. Seattle, Bruce Harrell called when he came to our building facility, which we call the Hope Factory, a year ago with the governor of Washington, Jay Inslee. Bruce got up there and he said, this is our first best solution to homelessness. And it comes in 2 key parts. Part 1 is what I do all summer, volunteer-fueled tiny home production, where we build, all volunteers, we build these homes, or micro-shelters. I'm going to go back and forth with that term, because I'm used to tiny homes, trying to cross over to micro-shelters. These then need to be placed in effectively run tiny home villages, and I'll tell you what those look like. So, for me, this began, well, the whole program up there began in about 2017. When local church members from Alki Congregational in my old neighborhood in West Seattle decided that they didn't like the way folks were suffering at a homeless camp we had in West Seattle. We had 50 tents on a vacant city property, people pretty much out in the weeds. And so the church raised funds to build a half a dozen tiny homes and bought materials, dumped them on the property of the homeless camp, and got to work working out in the weather, building tiny homes. It took them about 6 weeks to build the first tiny home. They had a couple skilled people there, knew what they were doing, and they built a tiny home, replaced the tent. That was great. Then they started on the second one. 6 weeks. Started on the third one. So they're in this process, and a young guy, I call him young, he's probably 40, had just sold his online architectural design company and was looking for his next thing to do, and he heard about this operation at the homeless camp, which we call Camp Second Chance. And he went up there and looked at everybody and said, you know, folks, I really love you, but you're doing this all wrong. And this guy's name is Tomas Bernanke. And Tomas came in and built us tooling jigs and built us production plans and all these things to automate our production process. This is a jig to build the front wall. This is the jig I man during the summer, and I lead new volunteers where we build in the morning a front wall. Then in the afternoon, we do what's called a tilt-up of all 4 walls on the platform. Then we put the roof on it. And by the end of the day, we start at 9 in the morning, where we give the new folks a tour of what we're trying to do of the factory and everything else. We build the walls and the other structures and the floor and the roof in the morning. We have lunch, and then we give all the new volunteers a training as to what it's like to be homeless, what it's like to get out of homelessness, and what a tiny home village, how it runs, and why we're doing this. And then we do the tilt-up. And by 1:30 or 2, we've built a home. It's pretty cool, and it gets people very, very excited. So Tomas automated our whole process, and we were able to, over about 2.5 years, we went from 6 weeks to 10 days to build a home. And the other big improvement was a couple volunteers got tired of working in the rain and donated a $6,000 construction tent, 30 by 60. And so we were indoors, and our build rate moved to every 10 days. And so over two plus years, we replaced 50 tents with 50 tiny homes. We were pretty excited, but we were done. And we couldn't get the support of the city or the county. They were like, what is this? We don't know this. But then something happened in 2020. COVID. Camp Second Chance, where we were, remained COVID-free. And government officials were really wondering how did they manage COVID in the homeless community. They couldn't. So they got behind us finally. And they funded us. And they got us warehouse space down in Soto, south of Seattle Industrial District, where we created the Hope Factory. And that's shown here, where we're building now over 200 homes a year. And we could be building up to 300 homes a year if we didn't have the bottleneck of placing the homes in a new village. That's the hardest part. This is world-class production by volunteers. Seattle is not world-class as far as creating new tiny home villages. I can talk about that, and I will. But anyway, it's a great operation, and I can't stress enough, it's all volunteers. We have one paid person, that's Barb. She runs everything with an iron fist. I get yelled at every day. I'm not kidding. Barb I volunteered with for 2 years at Camp Second Chance. She volunteered 6 days a week, volunteered, until they finally decided we better pay this woman and keep her, and they hired her. So she's our one paid person. The rest, there are just a bunch of volunteers. Now, they're all not young people. We get a lot of young people. We've had 6 Eagle Scout projects. Where the Eagle Scout runs the day and gets his badge. We have high school kids come in, all that. People of all ages, but we also have a lot of seniors. In fact, I see everybody in this room is able to volunteer at our Hope Factory. And as proof, just last month, my team, where we put the panels up and the floor in, was Joan is 84, Betty's 81, Yvonne 75, and down in that corner, my team was Tommy 87 and Richard 81. We have senior people that live in senior communities every Wednesday come in and they build different days of the week. Again, we build 6 days a week, so everybody can get involved, and it's just a whole lot of fun, and it's very easy to bring people back, and they love to help, and they love to build, they love to play with. It's not just individual volunteers like myself, but it is also, we bring in groups. 6 days a week we build, 6 days a week we have a group coming in for team building. Sometimes it's big companies, all these companies have sent people in, but it's also church groups, Rotary clubs, birthday parties, retirement parties. We'll have 6 to 20 people show up in a group that want to build for the day for a team building opportunity. And it really, really works well. I've done a lot of these working at Boeing through the years. This is the most effective team building I've been involved with. And it's so popular. If the Green Valley Democrats wanted to go build, you could not get an appointment until February. We're booked 3 months out. So that's how many volunteers you have showing up 6 days a week. And another very cool thing is Lowe's sponsors us. They're happy to sponsor us. We get discounted building materials. And when they sent their national team in, like every company, they got a community outreach department, and they do things like this. And they came to inspect our Hope Factory, and we're so in love with it. Their lead person said, "I want to sponsor more of these." And Barb said, "Well, it's about $60,000 to set one up." He said, "I don't care. I want to sponsor." She said, "Well, I got a volunteer here trying to do this in Tucson." He said, "We'll cover it." So Lowe's is on board to start a Hope Factory in Tucson. Pretty exciting. If we can get that going and build the homes, we got to place them somewhere. And they go in these villages, micro-shelter villages. I got 6 pictures up here of different village examples. And you can tell they're all very different. And that's because of a couple things. One is zoning is quite different everywhere around the country. And so what zoning requires really varies, and it drives different build designs. Also things like weather drives different build designs. So the one in the lower left, those are our homes. We built those, but they're very different from other ones around the country. But if you don't effectively run a village, you just set it up and let them come, you're going to have a problem. And Seattle experienced that. It's a big setback. So what does an effectively run tiny home village look like? Well, first off, most critically, social workers are located on site. And quite often, like 1 or 2 of the homes we build will be an office for a social worker. Or the communal big buildings, there'll be social worker offices in there to help people that are residents get back on their feet. A multitude of needs they might have, from getting IDs so that they can get a job, from getting health services, maybe addiction services, maybe, all a wide range of needs. These villages put service support right on site, and that's critical. One of the most important services they provide is, again, this is just transitional housing, never meant to be permanent. The goal is to get them in and out into permanent housing as fast as possible. Okay? That's what social workers are working on doing. Now, last week in the Arizona Daily Star, Tucson's paper, there was an article about the University of Arizona's the 2023 Homeless Needs Assessment Findings. And the top things that were found from interviewing about 500 people in Tucson currently experiencing homelessness was, 1, services are really hard to find. They want the services, they can't track them down. Well, in a village, they're in the house right over there. It solves that problem. Number 2, 69% of those interviewed prefer living alone or with family or a partner. Only 8% said, "Yeah, I want to go to a shelter." And that's a real problem. Shelters are not popular. A lot of people would rather camp than be in a shelter with a lot of other people, and a lot of rules. You got to get out in the morning, and it's just shelters are not as successful sheltering for people experiencing homelessness. So we're providing highly desirable homes for people that are out there on the streets. And another thing I'd like to point out is, I had a meeting Tuesday up in Tucson with a woman, Susan Courts, who's the CEO of Catalytic Health Partners. And her organization provides health care for low-income people throughout Arizona, including people that are homeless. So her people are out there going to villages, helping people that need their support. They do a wonderful job. This is a lot safer environment for her team to do their work than that. An average social worker out there is probably 5'4", 120 pounds female. And so Susan will defend that most of her people don't feel in danger at all, but it's just it's a more safe environment, and it's a lot more efficient environment for them to be working in. So that's a big part of what we're doing. And another aspect is, what's the cost? And you probably heard that a lot of communities are buying hotels or motels, but in Seattle that costs about 10 times as much as what we're trying to do. So this is far more cost effective. Now, I have talked to people, there's a lot of anger out there at the homeless problem. And we heard it at a meeting on Monday night up in Tucson. The neighbors are just furious at those people, and they want them to leave. I got hooked up with another volunteer in Seattle who's an architect, and he was trying to do the same thing in his hometown down in Little Rock, Arkansas. Here's the design they came up with for their micro shelters, where we build one wall and a jig. They're going to build half walls and jig. A little bit easier for volunteers, they think. But that's, it isn't, again, the Hilton, but it's better to be in a tent on the street, on the sidewalk. And they even came up with a design for families. There's a lot of families out there experiencing homelessness. They got bigger ones for families. So that is, we're trying to do the same thing down here in Tucson. So since last November, I've been lobbying. Had the lobbyist, new for me, I'm a Boeing guy, but I have been able to bring in a lot of people to what we call the Tucson, we didn't know the micro-shelter name back then, Tiny Home Coalition, including the ones that are bolded up here are organizations that work in this area. Like La Frontera Center is the largest affordable housing provider, I think, in the whole state. And community partnership with Southern Arizona, they were trying last year to do a couple micro-shelter villages, one in Casa Grande, another one in Eloy. I mentioned Catalytic Health Partners, and Susan Court, she's super supportive. In fact, she sent me an email about 2 hours ago of a new project she's in charge of for a shelter in Tucson that has 7 acres. and they want to do a housing project of some sort on it. Would I be interested in being part of that? Yes. Absolutely. So anyway, we have people involved that are in this business of trying to help the homeless and do something positive. And also politically, there's 6 wards up in Tucson, and 4 of them have joined the coalition. Surprisingly, Ward 4, Nikki Lee, who just got reelected, would not join. Very supportive. I had 2 meetings with her chief of staff, and very supportive, but she probably thought, re-election campaign, it might not be the best politics. She didn't know, so she was scared. Whereas Paul Cunningham, my meeting with him, the first thing out of his mouth is, I'm your biggest supporter, I'm gonna, so it's just politics. And then Dan Ranieri is the CEO of La Frontera. I had a couple meetings with him. He said, I got my eye on 28 acres down by the Air Force Base. Just think what we could do with 28 acres. Hundreds of micro shelters, hundreds of tiny homes, permanent houses. He's all excited. And then I had a meeting with the head of the Salvation Army, and he said, we got a shelter, it's always empty. I want to put tiny homes on our property. We got a lot of extra space. Great. So I submitted those 3 properties to the Tucson zoning department for assessment. What can we do? And waited, and waited, and waited. Finally got an answer back. And the answer was, well, we don't have any zoning that works. And you could try and force it into a shelter care zoning use, but it has a limit of 15 residents and all these setbacks, all these prohibitions of actually being successful with making a project like this work. Shelter care wouldn't work. Physical and behavioral health service zoning wouldn't work. Nothing will work that's on the books today. We can't do a project in Tucson. We don't have zoning for it. They've never seen it. And in a meeting with Steve Kazacek, who's the councilman from Ward 6, he said, you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We just got to come up with new zoning. And so he was absolutely right. So here we are. This is hopefully a major success. This is old fire station number 8 that I just mentioned on West King Road up in Ward 3. You can see it's quite a large property. Here's the building, the old fire station. Look at that, all that space behind there. Think of all the micro shelters that could go on that. And here's some photos I took of it. Back in August 8th, at a city council mayor meeting, they had an hour, they talked about this, wanting to develop this into a project like this. And they even showed a couple slides they had were images I gave them, so I was so happy. But zoning won't allow it. So Kevin Dahl, whose ward this is in, he made a motion to revise zoning in an expedited fashion to make this happen, and it was passed unanimously. So that was big news. So does that mean it's going to take 3 years instead of 5? Well, and my other idea is, look at this. Look at that old fire station. A couple of those fire truck bays would make a great space for a hope factory. We could build these right on site and just move them over, fit them up. So this has been moving forward, and last Monday night they had their first public meeting on this in the neighborhood. They let the neighbors know about it and give their responses. They call it a listening session. And Shama and myself and other friends went up there, and I got a lot of angry neighborhood feedback. People don't like those people. There's a lot of legitimate concerns, but I thought city staff and the office of Ward 3 and other professionals they really answered them well with saying, one woman would say, I run the church across the street and I don't want those people in my neighborhood. You want them off the street, let's give them a home. And we went through step by step all these concerns. This is how we're going to make it better. Another thing they said is Tucson runs 4 shelters right now in their Housing First project for homeless people. And 53 of those people include children. And the big change in the neighborhood with the shelters, there's more school buses coming in. Senior women has the biggest spike in homelessness in Tucson. They are those people. So, people are angry at the problem, and I get that. And so we're trying to solve it with a pragmatic solution, and I sure hope they can hear what we tell them. Sometimes anger is such you don't hear. Facts and data don't work at all. What are the top things that you need to consider for the village to be successful? And number one at the list, the clear code of conduct. Code of conduct. And all residents that move into a tiny home village have to sign a code of conduct. They have to, the rules are clearly stated. And villages are different. Not only what they look like, but you could have high barrier to low barrier. Now, where I volunteered building tiny homes at Camp Second Chance, that was a high barrier village, meaning it was clean and sober, a lot of rules, you had to follow them. I became friends with a couple residents that didn't follow them, they got kicked out. And that's how it is. The organization that runs these got to know what they're doing and do it correctly. And this is just, they had like the top 100 things. I just pulled in a couple pages as an example. So there's lots of things to consider over here. Well, do people have the resources even to feed themselves, and what's the spectrum? A story on that real quickly is my first day volunteering at Camp Second Chance. I had a young guy, probably 30, training me. And at lunch, we're sitting there, and I said, so what part of town do you live in? He looks at me and he goes, I live in that home right there. He was homeless, living in the village. And he was dressed nicely. I was dressed in my painting clothes. He worked full-time, swing shift as a security guard, and could not afford Seattle rent. No way. So you have a lot of people that are homeless that are working. They just can't afford, homelessness is a housing problem. They can't afford the housing necessary. If you don't have family or friends that can help you out, you can be stuck. You can be in your vehicle, you can be in a tent. An effectively run village is going to be able to understand all of their residents' needs and hopefully meet those needs, including any food needs, nutrition needs.
For the post office, she was a school teacher, yet they couldn't afford the housing.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Let's go here first.
I know the issue is affordable housing. I mean, and it's become a really major issue since COVID because of the way things have gone. I've heard about different cities taking all that office space that is now sitting empty because people are working at home. They don't need all this stuff, and trying to convert that into affordable housing for individuals. Do you know anything about that? Or have you heard?
I don't know of a lot of existing projects where vacant office space is being allowed to be turned into affordable housing. Our nephew is a construction engineer, if you will. He's managing 5 new buildings on the Microsoft campus. 2 of those buildings are mothballed, No one ever moved in because they don't need them. People are working from home. And they're sitting there empty. Let's put affordable housing in there. Well, they're on campus. It won't work. It's going to be a hard sell because of logistics like that. Probably, it just depends. But it sure seems like something to pursue. Not my project, but yeah.
Yeah, you walk around a lot of these, smaller cities, and they've got a lot of open office spaces now that aren't being used.
Right. Yeah.
Down front here. And then here.
I'm trying to figure out how to frame this question. So what happens in tiny homes that makes people want to move into permanent housing? I mean, they're safe and all that kind of stuff. Does that provide the impetus for them to go, there's hope in life and I'm going to grab it, whereas maybe if they're living on the street, they don't have that?
That's actually a great question, and it's something we address at the Hope Factory when Barb, after lunch with the new volunteers, does what she calls a little circle up, and she tells people about the experience of being homeless. And again, every homeless person is unique. You've met one. So they're all in different positions. And some people, their stories where they've been homeless and they get into a home, even an apartment, and they can't handle it because it's been so long, or they sleep on the floor because they haven't slept in a bed for so long. So people are in different spaces. But you give people a tiny home. It's a simple space, but it's their space, and a door that locks, and help us on site. So the person, if it's done right, the social workers on site assess that person. What do they really need, and how can we help you move forward and work with a plan for them, individualized plan for them. And they're all going to be different. Everybody's different. Different experience, different people, different background, different trauma. A lot of trauma.
One of the things I've heard too is one of the social programs that the community college has joined in, and they're providing education of steps for some of these people in the homeless community.
There was a professor from the University of Arizona who works on these issues who stood up and said, I live right next door to a homeless shelter. And we have for 10 years and raised my 2 teenage daughters there. And in 10 years, we've had one incident. One guy not behaving. And that incident was taken care of by other people in the shelter. And so, again and again, the city officials were trying to say the evidence shows it makes the neighborhood safer, not only cleaner, nicer, but safer. And all these problems we're worried about, we're seeing legitimately worried about. We can solve them proactively doing this. I wrote an op-ed to Tucson paper last spring criticizing them because it's taking too damn long. And I got chastised by a couple staffers for councilmen. Well, at the meeting Monday, they were talking, the architect, they're working on it. And they said they want to come up with something not just for the fire station, but that can be used all around the city. And he was insinuating after the first of the year. Okay, great. Is that January or is that next December? I think it's closer to January. I'm hopeful. And we need that. And then when that's done, if the St. Francis project, for example, want to go forward, you have same zoning for there. Because what they want to do, I don't think zoning would allow. So hopefully it's sooner than later, but it takes place.
First turn, then you, Angie.
Have you built any? I know that you're building tiny houses, but is there a location where they're being placed at this time?
In Tucson?
Yes.
Yes and no. There was a new village for, I think, homeless youth that was established over a year and a half ago. It's only like 10 shelters, and because of zoning, they had to have a continuous awning over all 10 to make it one, or something like that. They did that, and then in Tucson, a woman named Chris Olson Garwal, who's a retired physician, and her son have been they started the homing project, and they're trying to establish a village using pallet homes, which are FEMA homes, those white hard plastic that use disasters, built in Everett, Washington. And they're smaller, but they work just great. They can set them up in a couple hours. They're more expensive. They're like $14,000 a pop. But she has been trying to do that. She has a board, she has donors, they got grants. I mean, they're really doing great stuff. Had a meeting with her last week. They had a project in Ward 5 last year. They got a grant moving forward. Ward 5 councilman was against it, put his team on it, found a glitch in their grant application, didn't dot an I, killed the project. So that one, they're still working, back to the drawing board. They got a new property. Again, they're doing it themselves. They're not like me trying to inspire the city, the county, or a private organization. They're doing, and they're still working away. But right now, it's very limited up there.
Angie?
You talk about the little micro houses turning over every 4 months with people moving out. Not to be negative, but what's the percentage rate of people not being able to go out and get it? Because I think of, a lot of times you hear the homeless, it's not having the address and not having the showering, the ability that way. But there are going to be a percentage of people that just aren't going to make it. Do you know what those figures are?
Well, to clarify what you're getting at, people that are accepted into the village and they signed the code of conduct and signed the contract, we had a rate of turning those every 4 months, and about 90% got in, over 90% got into permanent housing. We had that. But there's a lot of folks on the street that maybe it won't work out for.
Because there is a screening process.
Yeah.
That you go in to displace them, so.
But as that book, Homelessness is a Housing Problem, will tell you, if you look at the data, there's not a lot of people out there that want to be homeless at all. And you don't drive up homelessness at all by offering services, you actually lower it. And homelessness isn't all about drug addiction or alcoholism. About 25% of the people out there are alcoholic, drug problems. A lot of people with drug issues got them when they became homeless because it's tough. And so they self-medicate, and they take meth to stay awake all night so they're not raped. So one last pitch, sign up for my emails, and I could use some help. I really could with people. Did that list get, there should be a couple of them floating around.
Couple back here.
Thomas got one back there.
Back door. Dave, you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. If anybody else has questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Remember,